So, Warlord and Yumeko, or Lockout in general, is an obstacle that you will encounter a lot in arena defense eventually. Like, maybe you will not meet a lot of it in like bronze or silver, though you will definitely see it if people have it. But when you get to like gold and platinum, you will meet it all the time. And of course, one way to deal with it is just to avoid it and fight other teams. But there is basically three typical ways that you can counter warlords or lockout. And many of the tactics are very niche and it depends on specific champions that you have. But there is actually kind of a variety of ways to deal with it. And they are not all as good as the others. And some of them will be faster fights and you might need better gear or specific champions. But there is actually a bunch of different ways and definitely more than just the ones that I'm gonna mention in this video. But I thought this would be a very good topic because many people were asking for me about advice in tag team arena. And this is one of the main issues that you will encounter in tag team arena if you want to climb. That you definitely need to be able to deal with teams that have a lockout. And not just lockout, but like CC teams and speed teams and all kinds of different teams. But lockout team is one of those archetype teams that it's usually a fast warlord or Yumeko, and it could be kind of tanky team usually, but usually people don't put any like very squishy offensive teams in defense anymore. But even if they just have like Arbiter, Lockout and Baron, many people might not be able to deal with this type of team. And today we're gonna take a look at the three different types of like archetype ways that you can deal with this. And the three different ways to deal with Lockout is either being faster and CCing them first, resisting them, or being able to use skills or champions that you can use even while you're locked out. And that might seem very obvious, but there is actually quite many niche ways that you can use these kind of strategies. And you probably know many of these, and some of them you might have never heard about before. And let's take a bit closer look. But the first one is the very typical way that you want to outspeed the enemy. And obviously, if you're faster than the enemy, like you have a faster Arbiter or faster Lockout, then that's like typical way to do it. And that's what top arena players do when they have very fast like 400 speed Arbiters or 430 speed Yumekos and so on. But me, for instance, I can show you that I'm not fast. My Arbiter is like 330 speed. I mean, to be fair, she's in Stone Skin. Where is she? Oh, okay, there. So my Arbiter is in Stone Skin, and it is for tag team arena. Like, she's able to deal with other CC teams. But unless you're very fast, then the option of going first often may sound completely impossible. But actually, there is many ways that you can manipulate the turn meter other than just being faster. And one of the primary ones that is very common in this current meta is that many of the top arena players stack temporal chains blessing that decreases enemy speed for each buff, and it has the active effect of decreasing the turn meter at once by 15% when they get the third buff. And this actually stacks, so you can have multiple champions with this mastery, and maybe enemy just has a shield buff at the start, and you're able to outspeed with this. This might seem very small amount, but if you're kind of fast and you're fighting other fast people, then this is actually very relevant way to outspeed, and it can easily make the difference that with this you're able to outspeed them. But this is just one of the few other different ways that you can do it. Like, I'm sure I will forget some of the specific ways because this is all very like specific, but for instance, one of the most popular ways right now is to use Shamael, and he has a passive that removes the fears from allies and gives turn meter to your party leader. And it says in the tooltip that it gives turn meter to the champion that it removes fear from, but actually it gives to the leader. So if your arbiter or lockout champion is the leader, or whatever CC champion you use, maybe you can outspeed the enemy lockout and CC them with your own lockout, or other champion like, I don't know, Kaimar or whatever else you have. Or maybe you can even just kill them before their lockout takes a turn. But that's one way to gain turn meter, but actually two very popular ways that used to be back in the days that don't see a lot of use nowadays, but they are still totally viable, but it's very niche and it depends on the specific enemy team. But in Tag Team Arena, actually you will be able to use these two tactics a lot. And the other one is using Mauli, and many of the more older players might know this tactic, because this used to be very meta back in the day. But yeah, Mauli has a passive that gives 15% turn meter every time she's hit, and obviously it has a cooldown, but basically 1 turn cooldown. But if the enemy team hits her first, then 15% can often be enough for you to move first if you are like anywhere comparable speed to the enemy. And the way she was used back in the day was that Hegemon used to be in pretty much every single arena defense team, and the reason for it was specifically so that enemy lockout couldn't move before you, and your own lockout would go before them, and they would have to use immunity lockout and sacrifice stats and speed to be able to use it. And when the enemy has a Hegemon, and he will either start with his A1 or A2, but if he does his AoE nuke, he's gonna hit Mauli and give your team turn meter. And if he does his A1, which was a tactic that some people started using when we got the AI settings, but it will still always hit the lowest HP champion in your team. So if you have Mauli the lowest HP champion in the team, Hegemons will always give your team turn meter, and it is a good way to ensure that you can move first and either CC or just kill the enemy team before they get the turn. And you can obviously combine all of these methods together. You can use your own speed booster, you can use your own temporal chains, stack multiple of them, you can use Mauli or Shamail, and of course Hegemon that I also mentioned. Like one typical tactic that people kind of still, even to this day, but it used to be a lot more popular to do, is that instead of using Hegemon A2 at the start of the fight, you will do the A1, and you will use the Evil Eye Mastery that reduces enemy turn meter by 20% if they are hit by A1, and you can choose the enemy like Arbiter or Warlord or whatever, and target them and ensure that you will go before them, even if they have like immunity set. But Hegemon kind of became a lot less popular for several reasons. Like we have reaction nowadays, so the threat of a nuke Hegemon isn't as big. And also of course Stone Skin set. And Stone Skin set doesn't just stop the damage, but you actually can't be turn meter manipulated if you're wearing Stone Skin set. So Hegemon can't reduce the turn meter even with his A1 against targets in Stone Skin. And you don't really see that much Stone Skin Warlords anymore. It used to be very meta, but you might still see it sometimes. But basically, even Hegemon and some combination of these different champions and tactics and masteries, you can use all of them together to find a way that you can move first and lock out the enemy or kill them. And obviously this is very champion specific way, and not everybody can do it, but it is an option. And let's say enemy has a slow team, maybe they have multiple lockout teams in Tag Team Arena, and you know that this team is a tankier one and the lockout is not gonna be very fast. Maybe even if you also have a very slow team, but you might still be able to outspeed one of those lockout champions. And the second way, which is kind of what I use as well myself, and this is also kind of very common knowledge in top platinum and very popular, but it's kind of not super well known, like, for most of the players. But if you build a Kaimar in Resistance, then he will be able to reset the cooldowns on your team, and then you will be able to, for instance, lock out the enemy team yourself or just kill them. But yeah, let's take a look at an example of using Resist Kaimar, but it is pretty straightforward. Like, his Warlord is gonna lock my team out, and my Kaimar, who is built in 4-piece stone skin and in Resistance, he's gonna resist it, and he's gonna be able to reset the cooldowns on the rest of my team. Like, this is of course not gonna work against every team. You need to have a Kaimar or Yumeko, and you need to have enough resistance. And the enemy team has to be the type that you are able to, like, take a hit, and even if you're not able to move first, you will still be able to win. But many of the Lockout teams are very stally, especially in tag team arena. Like, they often might not have any nuker in their team at all, or they might be something that isn't very threatening, like, I don't know, like Mountain King or some other, like, Stalin nuking champion. And this is a very simple, good way to deal with it. And there's some other ways that you can do resistance tactic other than just having Kaimar or Yumeko. And one way, for instance, that I remember an old clanmate used to do, this is maybe like 2 years ago because he quit long time ago, but I remember there was a guy called Creamy in my clan, and he was kind of low spender as well, and he was consistently finishing very high using a team of, I think it was double Candy and Cardiel. And basically what he did is that his Cardiel was in Resistance. This was before Stone Skin. I'm pretty sure it was in, like, Untouchable, but, like, his Cardiel was in Resistance, and as of course you know, Candy has, like, pretty much the best A1 in the game. Like, now Georgid A1 is kind of good as well, so it kind of depends on RNG if it's better, but outside of that, Candy A1 hits incredibly hard, and it's the second or the first best A1 in the game. But his Cardiel would resist the enemy lockout, and then he would be able to do ally attack, and the Candies would, like, trash the enemy with the A1, and he didn't even need their skills to be out of cooldown to be able to kill them. And that's actually kind of the third method as well. So the first method is outspeeding the enemy by different ways. The second one is resistance, and the third one is using champions that don't mind being locked out and can still kill enemy team. And for instance, Candy is one of those champions that he might still be able to do a lot of damage even if he's locked out. And Rotos is kind of like that too. Like, Rotos A1 doesn't do as much damage, like anywhere close as much damage as Candy, but he has a chance to get extra turns, and all of his skills are very low cooldown. Like, 3-turn cooldown is the highest cooldown that 3-turn cooldown is the highest one that Rotos has, and if you're just able to get his A3 back, then you will be able to beat the game eventually. So that's one way. But there's actually many other ways as well that are maybe not as good or more niche ways that you will be also able to kill the enemy even if you're locked out. And maybe the most famous one, again, this is kind of like, some people know this very well and some people have never heard about it, but it's gonna be Mortu. And this is something that I have always used in tag team arena myself. But basically, only thing Mortu needs to kill enemies is his passive, and it has a chance to proc a skill that ignores defense and basically one-shots everything in the game, and it also blocks revive. And if you're able to be tanky enough or stall the fight enough that Mortu has a chance to take a few hits, then he will be able to finish the enemy team even if he's locked out. And you can do this with many weird ways. Like, I used to run something like double Wokot, Doom Priest and Mortu, which sounds very like weird team, but basically all you need is one Mortu and some champions that can heal with passives, and you will be able to eventually kill enemy teams with Lockout if they don't have very strong nukers. And like I said, many of them don't have nukers, or they might have something like maybe Rotos that if you put in UDK and Mortu, then you will be able to deal with the Rotos single target hits, and then you still also have a chance to take AoE hits and so on. And there's a lot of champions in defense like Kaimar, Warlord, Valkyrie that will do a lot of AoE attacks, and Mortu is a great counter against those teams. And often Warlord is paired with those champions as well, like Kaimar, Valkyrie, like those type of champions. Often the Lockout teams will have those. Another champion that can kind of do the same thing as Mortu, not as well as Mortu, but it is kind of viable and worth mentioning, is Rorik, who used to be a fusion champion. And he has a passive that when he does a counter attack, he will use a skill that ignores defense and does a big amount of damage. And maybe you can pair him with like Valkyrie that is in resistance or is fast enough to get her cooldowns back. Or maybe you have revenge accessories or masteries that give you counter attacks. But if you're somehow able to proc counter attacks, like basically I would say that you pair him either with Valkyrie or what's it called? Martyr, yeah, Valkyrie or Martyr. Like if you can build either one of those in resistance or very fast, I think it will be a viable tactic against some teams. I remember back in the day, I kind of tried to use this tactic, but it wasn't very fast against top Platinum teams. But if you're just trying to climb in Tag Team Arena, you can definitely do this tactic. And another champion that kind of has similar thing that he can kill even with his skills being on cooldown is actually Heprak, because you know that he has the passive that when an ally is killed, he will use his A2, which is one of the hardest hitting skills in the game. And he will use it even if his A2 is on cooldown. So maybe you can use Heprak along with some other champion that will die first. And maybe you can also use some of these other methods together, like maybe you have like one Mortu and one Heprak, or some combination of these champions, or maybe you have a Heprak and Candy. Something like that, and you might be able to do it. And of course, in top Platinum, people are gonna use teams and strategies that are able to kill the enemy team very fast. But if your goal is just to climb in Tag Team Arena and maybe get Ramantu or just progress in the game, then definitely doing slower fights with these kind of niche tactics, it's totally viable. And let me actually show you the teams that I use. Like, even to this day, I do use the Mortu team in Tag Team Arena. And of course, nowadays I have a lot of more champions and I have some very good champions. So my teams are very different than they used to be. Like, I used to use like multiple Vogots in Tag Team Arena and so on. But even today, I still use the Mortu tactic. It's just very easy way to deal with Lockout teams. And I have talked about the Brakus Lydia tactic in other videos before, but that's another trick that is a very good way to counter speed teams. And often speed teams in Tag Team Arena will have Lockout as well. So this is kind of a team that counters both of them. And yeah, even something like Gala can actually do it. Like, you might have seen on my recent videos, if you have seen them, that I often use my Duchess, Rotos, Gala UDK team. It's one of my favorite teams, though it is kind of out of the meta right now, or it will work against some teams, but not against Taras and Marichka. But even that team will totally work against Lockout teams, even without me having my own Lockout or Resist Kaimar, because Gala, for instance, has very good A1 as well. It's kind of not as good as Candy, but it's getting close there, but she does ignore defense with her A1, so both she and Rotos are able to eventually kill Lockout teams if they have something like Rotos that I can counter with UDK and I'm able to buy enough time to defeat them. But yeah, I hope this video gave you some food for thought and ideas about how you can climb. And these tactics will definitely work even in top platinum, but it depends a lot on your gear and like what champions do you have. But even these lesser champions with lesser gear will definitely work if your goal is just to climb in tag team arena. Like I said, in tag team arena you will often find teams that have Warlord and no nuker, or they have like they're basically like a speed team with Warlord and nuker, but they are not very tanky, like something like Arbiter, Charge It, Lockout, Axe. But yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you found this information useful, and see you next time.